I'm Mimi Baines and these are the biggest shocks of the 2022 Formula One season. So the first biggest shock that we had this season I think has to be Ferrari. They had so many issues. They came out at the start of the season looking so strong, fighting. People actually thought, there's a lot of talk about the Ferrari hype train. People actually thought that they were going to be able to challenge Red Bull for the championship this season, the drivers and the constructors, with both cars looking so strong and Charles Leclerc just looking great, and there'd been a lot of talk about it, a lot of speculation that they've made some big improvements over the winter season. And I think it was such a big shock for everyone that they just kept making so many mistakes, whether it was a strategy, whether it was tyres, or whether it was driver error. And I am thinking back to a couple of Charles Leclerc's crashes where he just crashed out just because of a mistake. And people make mistakes, but if you want to win the drivers or the constructors championships, you cannot make mistakes. I do think it is a shame that they sort of tailed off towards the end of the season. They did finish P2 in the constructors championships, which it is obviously great, but they did nearly get beaten by Mercedes, which we'll get onto a little bit later. Well, Mercedes having so many issues, Ferrari should have capitalised on that, and they should have secured P2 a lot earlier than it being brought down to the final race. The second biggest shock of the 2022 season, as I just touched on, is Mercedes' lack of performance that they could get out of their car. Obviously, Mercedes won the constructors for the last 7 years, and coming into the season I think a lot of people weren't too sure what's going to happen, obviously with the rule changes, but I don't think anyone would have said that Mercedes were going to be as poor as they did end up being. Coming P3 in the constructors, not the end of the world, but as I said, with the mistakes that Ferrari were making, if Mercedes had the car, they could easily have capitalised on Ferrari's issues. Mercedes, because it wasn't so much strategic errors or tyres, it was just the fact that their car was just not fast enough. It just didn't have the power or to even bring the fight to Red Bull or Ferrari this season. It will be interesting to see what they can do next season. Obviously, we did get George Russell's win at the end of the season, and they did look a lot more competitive towards the end of the 2022 season. But I think they said they got a little bit more of an understanding of the car, and they understand the issues, and they could sort of answer it a little bit, but they could not bring it to the level to beat Ferrari or Red Bull this season. Now, my final biggest shock of 2022 isn't actually a team, it is a situation that happened, and that is when Max refused to give the place back to Checo in Brazil. Now, this is quite a controversial issue. I think Max obviously had secured the championship super early, he had already won, but Checo was still fighting Charles for P2 in the Drivers' Championships. And then when Max was let through to try and get ahead and get some places in the closing stages of the Brazil Grand Prix, he didn't get anywhere, and so the team were like, okay Max, well can you let Checo through, he needs the points. And Max said no, and he said no quite firmly. Instead he had his reasons. He's not confirmed what those reasons are. There's a lot of speculation that it's because of what happened in Monaco, where Checo spun at the end of qualifying, which didn't allow Max to finish his qualifying lap, which we assume would have put him on pole given the times he was setting. Now for me, I mean, talk about holding a grudge. Like, come on, you won the Drivers' Championships, it didn't really affect you. Get a grip, in the last possible way. But it's something clearly Max is not happy with. If it's not Monaco, perhaps maybe it's just the fact that he is #1 driver and he doesn't want to let his teammate through. It's unlikely that we'll ever know what Max's reasons are, but for me it was just a big shock that someone who has given you so much and helped you win your first world title last year, you'd maybe want to be a little bit kinder to. Because there's a very good chance that if Mercedes and Ferrari can both bring the power next year, they're not going to be able to win the title quite as comfortably as they did this year. And maybe Max is going to need Checo next year. But after that, you do have to ask, is Checo going to be, jumping out of the way to let Max through? I wouldn't if I was him, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. It will be very interesting to see what does happen next year. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think the biggest shocks were of the 2022 season. Drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you in my next video.